Have you ever wondered how biostasis works? Let us guide you through it. Medical biostasis is an advanced technology that aims to give you the best chance to live much, much longer than what is currently possible. But why do people want to live longer? Some people just love life and want to experience it for as long as possible. Some people are just curious about the future. They want to see what future cities will be like and what humanity will be able to achieve. Others think the world would be better and more fair if the length of your life was your own choice. There is no doubt that you will ever run out of things to do in a multifaceted world like the one we live in. In the end, the motivations are plentiful. But how can someone sign up for biostasis? First, you simply sign up with us and our insurance partner. It just takes a few minutes. To start, we only need some personal information. Don't worry, it's a simple process and we will guide you through every step of the way. Biostasis is achieved with the help of cryopreservation. Cryopreservation is a very advanced procedure that's still rather expensive and therefore not widely available. Tomorrow offers high-quality cryopreservation with prices starting from €100,000 and going all the way up to €400,000. Of course, this is a lot of money that few people can easily afford. But there is a solution. Together with our big-term life insurance partner, we offer a subscription model which brings the cost down to only €30 a month. About 90% of all biostasis contracts are funded via a term life insurance model. Let's say you're 30 years old and you want to sign up. The first thing you need to do is sign up with Tomorrow Biostasis, and we automatically contract with our term life insurance partner for your coverage. Now, should you pass away during the coverage period, the term life insurance will cover 100% of the cryopreservation cost. You are protected from day one. Should you pass away after the coverage period, then unfortunately the term life insurance will not cover the cryopreservation cost. But of course there are other funding options for this situation as well. We make sure that our customers have everything in place well in advance. Furthermore, there is a high chance that prices will come down significantly in the future, as we work consistently to reduce the cost of a high-quality cryopreservation. Congratulations! You are now fully signed up. Now, should anything happen to you where current medical technology can't save you, like a terminal heart disease, cancer, or whatever it might be, and the worst case happens and you should die, our team stands ready to pick you up and bring you to a medical research institute that is equipped for cryopreservation. Cryopreservation is an advanced procedure that uses medical cryoprotectant solution and very low temperatures to protect your body, and most importantly your brain, the part that makes you, against degradation. We keep you safe and sound for however long it takes until medical technology will be advanced enough that revival is possible. While we can't guarantee, that is arguably better than any other option. Then, once technology makes it possible, we will revive you. Should you have gotten cryopreserved at an old age, then revival will only be done once rejuvenation technology is available and the human lifespan is much longer than it currently is. Sometimes people are worried that life in the future might not be as enjoyable as it is today. But if history has shown us anything, it is that the average quality of life keeps getting better during the years. Now, after revival, you are free to continue your life as fit and happy as ever. Of course, this is a complex topic where a short video doesn't really do it justice. We are more than happy to answer any questions you may have. Just reach out to us. Find out more.
Welcome to our Tomorrow Bio webinar today. Today, we're going to talk about cryonics funding options. I'm slightly under the weather and the topic might be slightly not super exciting to some of you, so we're going to rush through it a bit, but of course have all the time for any questions that might come up in the end. My name is Emil, I'm the founder and CEO at Tomorrow Bio and also have some roles at EBF. And I'm going to run you through everything about this topic that we have about this topic today. As I just said, we have Tomorrow Bio on one hand, which is the day-to-day operative organization for cryopreservation, doing all the contractual work, doing the SST and the cryopreservation procedure itself. Then there's the European Biostasis Foundation, which does long-term storage. And now we're in the process of building another organization which we have set up, which is called CryoDAO, which is an organization that funds very basic research and kind of moonshot projects and so on. But that's just as the quick introduction. The webinar series, of course, doesn't only talk about funding options, but there's a good amount of other topics that we have already covered and will cover. If you want to see a topic that you might have missed, there will be a YouTube, or there is a YouTube recording where you can check it out. And then over the next couple of weeks, we're going to cover a wide range of other topics that you see here on screen. But today, it's going to be about the funding options of cryopreservation. Last time, we talked about what the cost of cryopreservation is, and now we talk about how to actually fund that cost. Before we get started, of course, these webinars are primarily not only there to give a quick introduction, but primarily also to answer questions. There are two ways how to ask questions, and then of course after the webinar, just as I did for the last webinars, I'm going to answer those questions. The first and preferred method is to go to sli.do and then enter the code 6255606. Or scan the QR code that you here see on the screen, and then there's an online question and answer, a Q&A tool where you can put your question in, and not only put your question in, but also uprate other questions that you feel like should be answered with high priority. If for whatever reason that system doesn't work for you, you can also ask questions in YouTube chat, but please go to Slido first. And then we're also going to answer questions on Slido first and then on YouTube chat if we find time. I'm going to show this QR code at the end of the webinar again, but if you already feel like you might have questions in the meantime, scan it now or go to slido.do and enter the code. Well, now without further ado, let's get started. Just as a quick reminder about cryopreservation cost. Quick reminder to what we discussed last time. So there's kind of two main parts of what cryopreservation, where the cost of cryopreservation comes from. One is a membership fee. With us, the membership fee is 25 euros per month. That membership fee covers, keeping the SST teams around, paying for all the structure that is independent, like trainings and so on, that is independent of an individual case. We will soon launch a so-called legacy membership, which will be 50 euros per month, purely optional, has no impact to preservation quality or anything like that. There will be some additional perks like invitations to specific events and like more merch and so on, that people, if they would like to, and also of course a larger part goes to research support. So if some of you might be interested in that, that comes up. But again, I want to stress this is purely optional and has not any impact whatsoever on cryopreservation quality. So that's the first part, membership. The second part is the cryopreservation cost. That amount of money needs to be always available at the time of cryopreservation. So it doesn't need to be paid directly or earmarked directly or anything like that. It needs to be available at the time of cryopreservation. And then depending on what kind of contract you have with us, the amount is for whole body preservation, which is our primary offering, and most people choose that, is 200,000 euros. If you choose to do brain-only preservation, which is an additional variant preservation that we have recently launched, then the amount is 60,000 euros. And if you already have a cryopreservation long-term storage contract with, for example, a US organization, but you live in Europe and you would like to have an SST, like a standby stabilization and transport contract with a local organization that might be, or not might be, but in most cases will be faster to do the preservation here in Europe, then there's a cost of 50,000 euros. So this is the cost that needs to be covered at the time of preservation. And now, of course, be it 50,000, be it 60,000, be it 200,000, these are not amounts that you would like to probably easily just transfer to us and then we keep them for the next 40 years. And in fact, we would strongly suggest to not do that because there's a lot of downsides with doing that. So there should be other type of funding options, how to make sure that if it unfortunately happens at some point that you should die, that at that time point, that money is available. Now, for most people that sign up with us, and people who sign up with us are usually somewhere between 30 and 40 years. I think the average currently is either 36 or 37, somewhere in that ballpark. For most people, the initially at least best option is to take term life insurance. So term life insurance is a risk insurance, meaning just like a car insurance, it covers a certain risk for a certain time. The advantage here is if you sign up for car insurance today or for term life insurance, and the second the insurance company accepts your contract, the coverage counts. So let's say in our case here, if you sign up for term life insurance today, the insurance accepts the contract tomorrow, and then something happens to you next week or next month, right, where you might die, and you do die, then the full coverage amount would be immediately available and paid out. Assuming, of course, there's a medical questionnaire in these term life insurance, that you didn't make any false statements during the medical questionnaire and some other terms and conditions. For young people, these term life insurances are very, very affordable. So you see here on the right for whole body, if you're relatively young, it starts at about 20 euros per month. If you just do brain only or SST only, it starts at around like even less than 10 euros, right? So very, very affordable if you're relatively young and relatively healthy. The most important thing for term life insurance to remember is that it has an end date. Basically, it covers a risk from start of coverage till an end date. The end date for most people, and I think this makes sense, is somewhere between 65 to 70. You can extend term life insurance contracts till around 85, but at that time they become significantly more affordable. So term life insurance contracts should not be considered like a cure-all. They should be considered as a good starting point to fund a cryopreservation contract if you want to sign up in your 30s, for example. But let's now assume that you sign up at 30, you take out a term life insurance contract until 65. Then, should you now die at 66 or 67 or any time after the coverage period, the term life insurance contract would not pay out anything. And at that point, your cryopreservation contract then cannot be funded from the term life insurance contract. Now, and in fact, not only it doesn't pay out anything, if you haven't died until the time the term life insurance during the coverage period, let's say again, it runs until 65. If you now are 66, you don't get any money back. So the logic here is that you insure a risk. That's why the money, the monthly amounts, the monthly payment, like these 20 euros or even less than 10, can be so low. Because of course the life insurance contract company calculates that only certain people will die, or only a certain amount of people will die during the coverage period. So they only need to pay out the whole 200,000 euros, for example, in certain cases. So that's why they can offer this insurance, this risk insurance, comparatively affordable. So term life insurance is a good starting point, but it's not a solution, until the end of where most people are going to die at 85 or 80, hopefully longer. So it's only part of the solution, but nevertheless, it's a good starting point. In fact, if you want to kind of give a rough have a rough estimation of how much a term life insurance contract might cost based on where you are, how old you are, and so on, go to tomorrow.bio/get-a-quote or get-a-quote, and we have a rough calculator of how much this contract might cost for you. The exact price will only always be available once you've answered a medical questionnaire, and that medical questionnaire has been checked by an insurance company. If you sign up through our webpage on tomorrow.bio, we're collaborating with an insurance company, insurance broker, where if you want, you can kind of do a term life insurance together with us, or more precisely with that insurance broker. It's all integrated into the system to kind of give, to support this process a bit, because most people luckily didn't need to deal with term life insurance that much in their life before cryopreservation or before being interested in cryopreservation. But of course, any other life insurance company is totally fine as well. We're not getting any money from signing up people with that term life insurance company. In fact, it's some extra work. We're just doing it to kind of support, give a bit of support, and lend a helping hand, because it's a bit of a tedious process. All right, so term life insurance, good starting point, but only goes till a certain age. The next option for funding are whole life insurances, or so-called capital building life insurances. So depending on what country you're in, whole life insurance can either mean it's a combination of a risk insurance and a capital building insurance, or it is very close to just a capital building insurance. So to kind of differentiate that between whole life insurance and term life insurance, let's mostly discuss the capital building insurance part. So primarily how this works is that, just as the word says, whole life insurance, it doesn't have an end date. But it also doesn't cover you immediately. So it practically, in simpler terms, it practically works like an investment plan, with like a savings account, with the option of having the money paid out at the time of death. So during your life, you pay money in, right? It might be initially, let's say 500 euros, and then you add another 1,000, and maybe you do monthly payments or annual payments or quarterly payments, and then the life insurance company is investing that money. So you add more and more money, and then there's going to be some interest or some return on the investment side of the term life insurance company, and at some point the money will be enough to pay for the whole cryopreservation procedures. But the downside, of course, is, let's say you pay in the first 2,000 euros, right? And then maybe you wait a year, and during that time there will be some return and some interest on that money. You pay in another 2,000 euros, so now you have 4,000 euros plus whatever return. There's going to be a bit more return, and then you die. Now, let's say there's maybe 4,500 euros in that whole life insurance contract, which of course would at that point not be enough to pay for the cryopreservation procedure. So while it doesn't have an end date, those 4,500 euros, even if you don't pay in any additional amounts, usually for the terms and conditions, you need to have kind of a recurrent payment into that term life insurance. But for argument's sake, let's say you have only paid in 4,500 euros, and then there's going to be interest. That is the amount of money that is still available, when you're 90 or however long you live. There's no end date. So one way of how you can kind of cover yourself initially and then also long term is combining a term life insurance with a capital building insurance or whole life insurance. So that would be one option. The insurance company that we work with also, of course, offers capital building insurances, but you can again use any other capital building insurance that you want. You can choose variable costs, so either you pay in a lot initially or you do it in steps, so there's a variety of options. And by the way, all of these topics that we're discussing right now, if you have questions, post the questions. Some stuff is a bit more complex, and of course we're more than happy to have calls with you, and wherever we can lend a helping hand, we're more than happy to do so. So just reach out on our webpage tomorrow.bio. All right, going on to the next slide. Kind of briefly, I already mentioned a couple of the pros and cons, but just to reiterate real quick between term life insurance and then whole life insurance or capital building insurance. So the pros of term life insurance, they're relatively inexpensive, 10 to 20 bucks if you're relatively young or relatively healthy, can of course go up with age and if you have any pre-existing conditions, but relatively inexpensive to start. Immediate coverage, high payout if something happens. The downsides are there's an end date and you need to answer a medical questionnaire, so they need your medical history to kind of do a risk calculation. And in theory, even though it doesn't happen super often, in theory, people can be rejected from these insurances because there might be some pre-existing conditions where the insurance says, well, we don't really have a risk model for that, we can't insure you. On the whole life insurance side, pros, doesn't have an end date, no medical history, at least if it's a capital building insurance. Also high payout security. Downside is no immediate coverage. And usually, at least from an investment standpoint, these life insurances, and this now depends on countries, so I'm speaking for Germany here primarily, these life insurance investment products where basically now, you put some money in and then over time that money is invested. Usually they need to invest in very, very low risk assets that usually over long periods of time underperform the market significantly. In other countries that's different, so in the US for example, this is not so much of an issue. Really depends on the country, what is allowed in the country. But in Germany this is a bigger issue where normally people would not recommend whole life insurance or capital building insurances as good investment products. For cryopreservation though, they still might make sense. Something that we are more than happy to discuss with you if any questions come up in the end. Now, let's talk about alternative funding methods. Let's say, term life insurance and whole life insurance or capital building insurance are kind of the main funding methods for cryopreservation. And then there's a list of alternative funding methods, right? Alternative doesn't mean necessarily they're worse, but they have some downsides that need to be clearly understood before choosing them. So the first one would be funding via last will, where basically you put in your last will or your testament that should you die, part of your funds should be transferred to Tomorrow Bio for the purpose of cryopreservation. Of course, here it's important that these always need to be liquid funds, right? Unfortunately, for a variety of complexity and logistical issues, you cannot donate your house to us, or not donate, but leave us your house, and then we need to sell the house and so on. This is unfortunately not something that we can offer right now. Potentially in the future we will under certain circumstances or even in individual cases, but there's a lot of red tape around it and a lot of complexity that definitely needs to be discussed individually. Now, the last will funding option, the main upside is that for your whole life, you basically have all your funds. You don't need to put them anywhere else. You can do what you want with your funds. You can invest them. You get the return in compounding interest and so on. That's probably the main, so you don't need to practically do anything while you're alive. These alternative funding methods, they have like a pretty flexible, pretty individualizable document with us where you can tell us exactly how this is all going to work should you die. So the process, like wide variety of individualization is possible. But there are some downsides. So the main downside here is that, or there's two main downsides. So they can be challenged by relatives. So you have died, so you can't take care of it yourself anymore. And now the relatives might be like, cryopreservation is not something I'm not really supportive of. So I try to somehow challenge the last will, and I'm trying to maybe get the money. So due to that, and even without challenge, there can be delays in the execution of the last will. And in fact, in most cases, there is some amount of delay. On the cryopreservation side, so we do not wait, even in a life insurance case, we never wait until we have the money until we dispatch. Right? The medical team is always being dispatched without us having the money. But we need to be sure that, of course, the funds are covered. So in a life insurance case, we trust the life insurance. In a last will case, there would need to be a good amount of paperwork and insurances that we can be sure that the last will funding method actually works. So that's why it's part of this alternative funding method system, where it's not something that you can directly sign up on our webpage. You can just say that you have alternative funding, or you would like to use alternative funding methods on the webpage during the sign-up procedure. And then we have an individual conversation with you to make sure that everything is going to go well at the time of death. Now, another alternative funding method would be upfront payment. You can, of course, decide to just transfer the funds for cryopreservation to us. The only downside is that we can only accept those funds once the death is within a reasonable time frame. Reasonable time frame means something maybe in the vicinity of 6 months. Can maybe be, under certain conditions, also be a year, but it cannot be 20 years, right? It cannot be where you let's say you're 60 or you're 40 and you think, well, I might die in the next 20, 30 years, right? So I'm transferring the funds now to tomorrow. That doesn't work. The reason for that is that based on our current legal structure and most other legal structures as well, we would need to hold these funds in truster accounts, where basically we hold your money as a trustee, as a truster account on our side, which brings a tremendous amount of legal complexity. Banks don't like it, and so on and so on. And even more tangibly, or more tangible downside, is that money cannot be invested. And if you, let's say, transfer 200,000 euros now and then wait for 30 years, the money would be eaten up by inflation, which of course is a significant downside. So it only can be done if death is kind of on the horizon. Let's say you've been diagnosed with an incurable disease and the doctors tell you that you might only have, let's say, 6 months to live. At that point, the money can be transferred to us. Of course, in 6 months, there is also not much of an inflation effect. And for short periods of time, we can in fact hold that money, but not for very long times. The advantage is you don't need to pay anything upfront, right? You can keep the money as long as you're alive. The downside is that during that time there is no interest but for short periods of time, that's not that much of a downside. One additional downside that is missing here on the slide is that, of course, let's say for your whole life you say, well, listen, I'm going to transfer the money at the time when my death is imminent, let's say within 6 months. But then it's also, of course, possible that you get hit by a car or die due to a heart attack before having transferred the money, right? Basically in a sudden death where you don't have time to transfer the money to us. So if someone wants to choose upfront payment, we would strongly suggest to have other alternative funding methods in place as well, kind of do a combination. Again, this is something that we're more than happy to discuss with you in a direct consultation, because again, it's a bit more complex to build a model or a funding method that has that covers all these, in quotation marks, potential edge cases. So that's upfront payment. The next alternative funding method would be trust or family foundation. Basically, you would set up your own trust or your foundation and tell that trust or foundation that part of the money that you give to that organization should be used for cryopreservation at the time of death. The advantages here are you have a lot of freedom how to structure it. You could use that foundation to fund other things, like, for example, make sure that there's enough money available or more money to be available for certain revival scenarios, or to return that money should you be then revived at some point in the future. So there's a lot of flexibility and additional things that this foundation could do to support your cryopreservation apart from just funding the cryopreservation itself. The downside is that setting up one of those trusts or family foundations is pretty complex, legally speaking, and so on. And you need relevant, relatively high amounts of funds available to set up one of these foundations, right? So this doesn't really work if you just have 200,000 or even 300,000 euros available. Usually significantly more funds need to be available. In the future, we might set up organizations that can do similar things at lower costs, but for now, those don't exist, so you would need to set up your own trust or family foundation, which comes with a lot of legal red tape and relevant amounts of fund required. So just to be complete or comprehensive in this summary, this is probably not something that most people would elect to do, but it is an option. Last but not least, for some people who are kind of coming from the blockchain and crypto environment, it is technically possible to set up it would kind of be a last-minute payment, but you set it up in a specific way, a so-called Multisick Wallet. So, which would be, let's for argument's sake say it's an Ethereum or a Bitcoin wallet, where then multiple people are able to sign for that wallet, meaning making decisions for that wallet. And you could, for example, say that if you select 5 people that you trust, and if 3 people out of those 5 people say, yes, the money should be transferred to the cryopreservation organization for the purpose of cryopreservation at the time of death, then this transaction can be made. Again, it's a bit more complex only for people who are coming from the kind of, from the field. Otherwise, this probably doesn't make much sense and it's relatively complex to set up. But it is an option that can be done. Also, of course, here it's kind of a combination between an upfront payment and a last will payment. No money needs to be, no funds need to be transferred upfront. Can be done at the time of death, but includes some complexity. And of course, even though you might say, well, out of these 5 people, I'm pretty sure that 3 are going to agree that cryopreservation should be done now. You, of course, need to always make sure that actually there are 3 that would make that call. And if they don't, then, of course, there's a bit of a risk that the funds are, in fact, not transferred in time. Right. So, to summarize, what would be our recommendation for all these funding options? So, as I already said, in most cases, if you're relatively young, it usually makes sense to start out with term life insurance. The important part here is to not just do term life insurance and then say, well, now I don't need to deal with it anymore. Now I'm safe forever. No, term life insurance, you're only safe until the end date. But since, let's say, you sign up at 35, you have a term life insurance till 65. Now you have a good amount of time to figure out all the other funding methods, and to be fair, also have your life to make enough personal wealth or accumulate enough personal wealth to potentially fund some of these other methods that we just briefly discussed. So around 20 years before your term life insurance contract runs out, we're going to start nagging you to say, hey, listen, you need to really start taking care of that. Think about other funding methods, like what's your solution here? And then, of course, as I just many times before, we're more than happy to help as much as we can. That is if you're young and relatively healthy. Now, if you're young but can't afford insurance yet, let's say you're not 35, but let's say you're 22 or 18 or whatever, and you still want to somehow get involved with cryopreservation a bit, we have a so-called fellowship membership, which is only €5 per month. It doesn't include a cryopreservation contract, so it's just basically being part of this community. But for every €5 that you pay in as a fellow, should you at any point in the future sign up as a full member, then for every €5, we're going to give you €6 discount to your membership. So it's not really lost money if you at some point think that you want to sign up for a full cryopreservation contract. If you have enough funds available already for upfront payment, you can put them all into whole life insurance and then just say, hey, the payout should be done at the time of death, which is of course the purpose of a whole life insurance contract or a capital building insurance. The downside here, if let's say you keep the money in there for 10 years, then that money probably is going to underperform market return rates, but of course it's going to be then available at any point. Should you die at any point, it is available to directly be paid out. And if you're already a bit older, let's say 65 or plus, or you're uninsurable due to having prior medical conditions, medical history, where the insurance companies would not accept you as at least a term life insurance contractual partner anymore, then you have the option of these alternative funding methods or whole life insurance as well. Now, all of that stuff can of course be combined. So you can have alternative funding methods and a term life insurance, for example. So there's a lot of individualization possible here. So these are kind of our broad recommendations, but then in individual cases, it might make total sense to do something slightly different. So we're more than happy to talk about this in more detail. Now, one last topic is when to actually sign up. Of course, some people say, hey, listen, I just wait it out and I sign up when I'm 60 or whatever. In most cases, apart from it being slightly, you pay slightly more membership fee over time. If you have made the decision that you want to do cryopreservation in principle, at least in my mind, it usually makes sense to just sign up. Relatively immediately. There have been cases in the past, unfortunately, and of course this is not super statistically significant, but unfortunately it does happen where young people said, hey, listen, I'm going to sign up like next year, and because I want to do this, I have decided for myself that I want to do this. And of course this is always the requirement that you actually, hey, said, I have made my informed decision that I want to do this, and then unfortunately, before signing up, they've died, and of course, in that case, no cryopreservation can be done. Again, not super statistically common, but it does happen. So, signing up early, if you do a term life insurance, you lock in a low insurance, like monthly payment rate, right? You also preempt the fact that you might not be insurable at some point in the future. If you get some medical disease, right? If you have already a life insurance contract, term life insurance contract, then future medical diseases, of course, don't do anything about this contract. If you do whole life insurance or other type of even though the interest rate might be not that great, you have kind of a compounding interest effect. To be fair here, if you would put that same amount of money into another investment vehicle, another investment product, probably you're going to make more compounding interest somewhere else. Very important as well, if you kind of are interested in this overall field of cryopreservation of cryonics, then signing up kind of helps build the community and kind of helps the overall field. But last but not least, of course, if you sign up, you're kind of safe right now if anything happens to you, which you might not expect, like an illness that you didn't predict, or like a last minute, like an accident, or any type of heart attack, something that kills you pretty fast. Even though that in those cases cryopreservation quality can be lower, a cryopreservation would still be done in the end. Risk of waiting if it's about term life insurance, cost might be higher. As I already said, you might become insurable. And even though it's not super common, young people luckily don't die that often. It is possible that people, and it has happened unfortunately in the past, that people die before having all their cryopreservation contract in place. Now, as I said, this topic is reasonably complex. There's a lot of individualization that's possible. There's a lot of combination of different funding methods possible and even recommendable. So here, even more so than with all the other topics, I would really strongly suggest to reach out to us, go to our webpage, send us an email, give us a call, reach out, and let's discuss this topic in person. We're more than happy to give all the advice and experience we can. And if it's about the insurance stuff, we're more than happy to connect you to our insurance, or at least lend a hand as much as possible. So definitely reach out at any time. We're more than happy to discuss and help. Next time, just to announce, the next webinar will be improving the quality of cryopreservation. So what can be done at what stages of the whole process to, in the future have higher quality preservations. The next webinar will be on May 31st. So, save the date and join us to discuss improving the quality of cryopreservation. One more time, go to Slido or scan the QR code, and I will do the same now. To then answer any questions that you have. And of course, if you have any questions still, put them in, or upvote questions that you feel like are more interesting and should be answered now. And now, without further ado, I'm gonna answer those questions. So the first question is, the Cryonics Institute allows one to pay far in advance. Yes. In the US, that is possible. In the US, you can fund cryopreservation contracts far in advance, and the organization holds that money, and there's no trust or account problem, and the problems that I mentioned before. That is, for better or for worse, a US unique thing where European organizations and German organizations or Swiss organizations are not able to do that. It's possible that in the future we're going to set up, with certain licenses, we're going to set up an organization that can do that, but for the time being, we're not able to do that. Next question is, if somebody develops a terminal disease during their term life insurance, can the insurance company back off and find a reason to not cover anymore? No, they cannot. So any disease that you are being diagnosed with during the time frame when you had the insurance does not change anything in your coverage. There's one exception. If you made false statements during the medical questionnaire. So basically, let's say you already knew about this medical disease, but you didn't disclose it at the time of signing up, then the insurance can try to back out. But if it is something that is really for the first time being diagnosed during the coverage periods, the insurance cannot back out. Next question is, idea. Is there a way we might cheer one up or whatever so they don't change their mind at the last minute when they have been signed up for a long term? I'm not sure. I hope that people don't change their opinion last minute. I'm not aware of this happening many times. I'm not sure what might be done there. But if you come up with an idea, let us know. Is the Cryonics Institute the least expensive organization? It is the least expensive organization that I feel like has a good track record of stability and so on. So from all the organizations that I would by and large recommend, the Cryonics Institute is for storage the the most affordable one. What's important, of course, always to state here, Cryonics Institute, from a price perspective, they don't include SST. So the cost, which is about $30,000 US for long-term storage there for whole bodies, doesn't include SST. So SST needs to always be added there to make it kind of a fair comparison to other organizations. But even in that case, at least if Alco and us is concerned, they're still more affordable due to them having less cost there. And to be fair, also they have significantly less funds available per person. If I'm not mistaken, they have like, I think, 25,000 US dollars per person about. I might not be exactly correct on the exact number, but in that ballpark. Whereas other organizations, for example us, we have 120,000 euros available for long-term storage for each person. Next question would be one on the single issue of the climate crisis and the location of the long-term storage facilities. Is the Cryonics Institute relatively good? I'm not exactly sure what the climate crisis and so on, how that will affect the Detroit region in Michigan. I don't think there's any big problem, but I'm also not aware of any other organization being strongly impacted by the climate crisis. I'm pretty sure all organizations are pretty far from any potentially rising sea levels or other climate changes. I think I'm not aware of any problem at Cryonics Institute regarding climate crisis. Next question would be, I'm not an insurance expert, but I think in the US there are life insurance policies available that are a combination of what called term and whole life insurance. Yes, there are. So some countries have combinations. So when I said, like, whole life insurance is kind of like a savings plan, that is relatively Germany specific. There are other countries where indeed there are combinations. So for example, like a universal life insurance in the US or index life insurance in the US. So there are indeed combinations. Here in Germany, in most cases, you need to combine them two insurances to kind of build the same product. It really depends a bit on which country you are in at. Again, since we support any insurance, if your country has any type of insurance that might work better, and there are definitely countries where that does exist, then it might make sense to sign up with one of those insurances. In our case, if it's a reputable large insurance company, we're gonna accept it. So there might be a good advantage if you use a local insurance, if they have local insurance products that are better for the specific purpose of funding cryopreservation. And in the US, those definitely exist. Next question would be, is there a way to put a full funded trust together invested to generate personal income payout, the monthly fee, and on death will pay out for Cryonics? You would need to discuss this with a trust lawyer, but to my understanding, this is indeed possible. So you can set up a family foundation or a family trust that has the purpose to fund the monthly, your monthly, you have a monthly income from that family trust and pay for cryopreservation. But the details you would need to discuss with a lawyer. My understanding is that these structures can exist, but the details I'm not sure. Next question is, if I give the money to a notary to give you after my death, will there be inheritance tax? You would need to discuss this with your tax advisor. And notaries usually don't like to keep money for that long either. So that might also be possible during short periods of time, but not for many years. And the tax questions, unfortunately, we cannot advise on tax questions. So unfortunately, you would need to talk to your tax advisor. I just went to the CI web page. They offer DNA tissue cryopreservation. Is there any benefit in doing that? So tissue, probably not. At least I'm not aware of any advantage. For DNA, there might be some amount of advantage in regards to if you do very young DNA. So let's say you're 30, 35, 40 right now, somewhere in that ballpark. Let's say you preserve your DNA right now. There might be there might be some amount of advantage that you have young DNA. And when I say some amount of advantage, it's I think in some edge cases that would potentially be helpful. In most cases, probably not tremendously, but there might be some advantage. Not sure how big, but you know, better safe than sorry. And the amount of course, money to save DNA is also not that high. So it might be a net positive to actually do it. But I would not expect like tremendous impact here. Making sure that you have all your documents in place and patient advance directive and last will, and make sure that you know where the next SST team is, and communicating with all of these things have significantly more impact on a high quality preservation and then potential revival than like keeping DNA around and so on. Next question would be, can Tomorrow interact with an existing financial institution managing individual money to suggest a solution in special situations? So this is something that we're considering working more on, where we would have a money management license, or it's not like at least a license from a financial authority, or collaborate with an organization that has one, so that we can offer basically options where money can be put, so that at the time of death that money would then be available for cryopreservation. But these are things that will not be available anytime soon. From our priority list, there's for better or for worse, significantly higher priority things like improving cryopreservation quality and so on, before we will be able to focus on that. But long term, this is indeed a plan that we have to think more about it. In some EU countries, there's a compulsory portion for relatives from the heritage money, life savings, life insurance. Is there a way to exclude relatives? So on individual legal matters in countries, we don't have the experience to advise on that. So you would need to talk to an inheritance lawyer in your local country, how exactly inheritance works there, and if there's a compulsory part. Unfortunately, we don't have experience about inheritance in other countries. If there's any more questions, I would switch over to YouTube chat. If there are any questions there, give me 1 second. Otherwise, of course, feel free to put more questions into Slido as well. Otherwise, I'm briefly going through YouTube chat if there's any questions there. Give me 1 second. There's one. In case of setting up a trust, how can I make sure that if I'm arrived in 500 years, it still have some funds in order to not be completely broke? So if you set up a fund, that's why I'm saying it needs relatively large amounts of money. So if you set up your own trust or family foundation, what you would need to ensure that the cost of managing that fund over, let's say 500 years for argument's sake, would need to be paid out of the return that fund can make per year. So let's say you put 10 million in and you assume 7% return per year. And now that 7% needs to pay for maintaining that trust, paying for the management and so on. But of course, if you on average make 7% of 10 million is 700,000. So you would have a significant amount of money available every year to maintain that fund. But if you only put, let's say, 500,000 euros in, then 7% of 500,000 would just be 35,000, and that would probably not enough to maintain that fund and have it actively managed. So you need a relevant amount of money to put into one of those trusts to make it worth it. I'm checking for other questions if there are any questions that have not been answered. In the case of funding with Bitcoin and the Multisick wallets, how do you handle the volatility? So the volatility in a Multisick wallet would need to be handled by the person using that Multisick wallet. So meaning that basically at the time of death, the amounts of funds needs to be transferred to us, right? Like the 200,000, for example. So if Bitcoin at that point has went down tremendously, then unfortunately that would be the responsibility of the member. So in those cases, it would be strongly suggested to overfund a crypto wallet significantly, so that there's always enough funds available. Let me see if there's any more questions, and if my colleagues see any, feel free to point them out. I don't think I see any additional questions. Then one last time, I would like, first of all, if you have last minute questions, put them into Slido, and I'm gonna answer it if I see it in the next minute or so. But otherwise, I would like to thank everybody for attending the webinar and discussing this topic with us. And then, of course, one more time, remind you, reach out at any time if there's anything you would like to discuss of this topic in more detail, or one of the topics, or one of the upcoming topics. More than happy to, of course, do that. Reach out to us anytime. Otherwise, see you in the next webinar or when you reach out. Thank you so much.